The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the meticulously manicured lawns of Crestview Estates. The neighborhood, with its sprawling mansions and pristine streets, was a testament to the power of the Homeowners Association, HOA. Each house stood as a monument to the rules and regulations that governed life within this exclusive enclave. Residents cherished their luxurious homes, but they also lived in constant vigilance, aware that the HOA was always watching. In this picturesque setting lived Jake Thornton, a self-made entrepreneur who had recently fulfilled a lifelong dream by purchasing a gleaming McLaren. The car was more than just a vehicle. It was a symbol of his success and independence. Its sleek lines and powerful engine whispered promises of freedom and adventure. Yet, as Jake reveled in his newfound pride, the HOA's shadow loomed larger with each passing day. The HOA had made it abundantly clear that they were not fond of ostentation. Rules dictated that all vehicles must adhere to certain aesthetics. No flashy colors, no excessive modifications. The McLaren, with its vibrant orange hue and aerodynamic design, was an unwelcome contrast to the muted palettes favored by his neighbors. It wasn't long before complaints started pouring in from those who found the car's presence offensive to their carefully curated vision of suburban tranquility. One fateful afternoon, Jake received a letter from the HOA. As he opened it, his heart sank. The association demanded that he surrender the keys to his McLaren for inspection. Their justification was vague, citing safety concerns and the need for compliance with community guidelines. The demand felt absurd. Who would dictate what he could drive? The idea that they could control his property sent a surge of anger coursing through him. Yet he knew better than to ignore the HOA's authority. They held power over everything from fines to potential lawsuits. Jake sat down at his kitchen table, staring at the letter as if it were a venomous snake poised to strike. His mind raced with thoughts of rebellion. How could he possibly hand over control of something that symbolized not only his achievements but also his freedom? The very idea of allowing the HOA access felt like an invasion, a loss of autonomy he wasn't prepared to accept. As dusk fell, the world outside grew quiet, but inside Jake's mind, chaos reigned. He envisioned standing before the HOA board, stuffy men and women draped in their self-righteous indignation, while they scrutinized every inch of his beloved car. Fear and defiance churned within him. What if he didn't comply? What if he took matters into his own hands? The thought of sabotage crept into his mind like an insidious whisper. Disabling the brakes would ensure that no one could drive the car away without risking disaster. It was reckless and dangerous, but in that moment, it seemed like a tempting way to reclaim control. He could keep them from invading his space while simultaneously sparking chaos within their ranks. A thrilling rebellion against an oppressive regime. Jake's heart raced as he thought through the implications of such an act. Would it be enough to deter their demands? Or would it escalate the situation further? As he wrestled with these questions, a fiery determination began to set in. He was tired of living under someone else's rules and ready to take a stand. In that dimly lit kitchen, Jake made a choice that would irrevocably alter the course of his life, and perhaps even the dynamics within Crestview Estates itself. With adrenaline coursing through his veins, he plotted his next move, unaware of the storm that was about to unfold. As Jake contemplated the letter from the HOA, he felt a knot tightening in his stomach. The McLaren was not just a car to him. It represented years of hard work, late nights, and tearful sacrifices. It symbolized a life where he could break free from the mundane expectations of the world, even if only for a moment. Each time he slid into its leather seats, ignited its roaring engine, and sped down the open road, he felt invincible. But now that very emblem of freedom was under threat. The way he had envisioned everyday life transformed completely upon acquiring the McLaren. It was more than a means of transportation. It was his escape, his thrill, a tangible manifestation of his achievements. He imagined taking long drives through sun-drenched hills or along coastal roads where time seemed to stand still. The vibrant orange paint glistened in the sun, captivating the attention of onlookers and sparking envy among neighbors. It wasn't merely about showing off. It was about celebrating who he had become. But as pride bubbled within him, so did a gnawing concern. The HOA's demand to surrender the keys felt like an invasion into both his personal space and autonomy. To better understand his emotions, he stood in his driveway, staring at the gleaming machine parked against the backdrop of neatly trimmed hedges and pastel-colored homes. With each passing glance at the car, he felt an unsettling mix of anger and vulnerability. The HOA's rigid control weighed heavily upon him, reminding him that their judgment overshadowed his enjoyment. Who knew that this association, composed largely of retirees and meticulous planners, would dictate not only what he could drive but also how he lived? That realization hit him like a ton of bricks. Hadn't he moved here to escape such petty governance? Living in Crestview Estates had promised luxury and comfort but had also bound him to an invisible leash. With every glance at the McLaren, he became acutely aware of how quickly freedom could slip away under the weight of rules and regulations. He began thinking back to certain moments when he had relished driving over the winding country roads that snaked through the outskirts of town. The wind whipping through his hair, the sound of the engine harmonizing with his thoughts. Each moment served as an affirmation of his hard-earned success. So why was he allowing a group of self-appointed guardians to strip that joy away? Yet Jake couldn't shake off the realism lurking beneath those pleasant memories. The threat to take possession of his car wasn't merely an inconvenience. It felt like an attack on his identity. This wasn't about just having a flashy vehicle. It was about being who he wanted to be. In this neighborhood filled with cookie-cutter homes and obedient residents, Jake refused to be just another faceless name on the HOA roster. As he weighed his options, dread crept in the back of his mind. What kind of person would he become if he relinquished control? Would he start giving in to more demands, turning himself into a mere shadow of his former self? Each possibility weighed heavily on him as he paced back and forth, trapped in a struggle between compliance and defiance, safety and risk. That's when the idea crossed his mind again. Forge a new path and regain power by sabotaging his own brakes. It was radical and risky, but as thoughts churned in his mind, they began to crystallize into something more definite. Could this act transform him from passive victim to active player in this game dictated by the HOA? His heartbeat quickened at the prospect, like an engine revving at the starting line, ready for the first burst of speed. With every boundless possibility rushing through him came a newfound sense of determination. He wouldn't let someone else dictate his happiness any longer, not while he had breath in his lungs or wheels beneath him. Jake sat at his kitchen table, the letter from the HOA still emblazoned in his mind. Their demand for the keys to his McLaren hadn't come out of thin air. It was rooted in a series of ironclad rules that governed life in Crestview Estates. As he mulled over their insistence, he could almost hear the collective whispers of the HOA members, their voices analyzing every detail of his life like hawkish guardians of neighborhood decorum. One of the primary reasons cited by the HOA was safety. The letter emphasized that certain exotic cars posed hazards, both due to their speed and attention-grabbing aesthetics. To them, Jake's McLaren was not only a spectacular slice of automotive engineering but also an accident waiting to happen. Neighbors had expressed concerns about children playing on streets slick with gravel, where they might inadvertently dart into direct traffic if a high-speed car sped by. Yet, the irony wasn't lost on Jake. How many times had he seen family SUVs barreling through stop signs? Aesthetics were another pressing factor in the HOA's demands. The association prided itself on maintaining a uniform appearance throughout Crestview Estates, a sanctuary where manicured hedges and muted pastels created an image of tranquility. Jake's vibrant McLaren clashed starkly against this backdrop, like a flamboyant brushstroke on an otherwise understated canvas. According to neighborhood guidelines, no one vehicle should detract from this carefully curated aesthetic. It threatened to turn their beautiful neighborhood into a scene worthy of roadside attraction. Then there were complaints from long-standing residents, vigilant enforcers who measured neighborly conduct with unyielding metrics. They had watched as new families arrived with flashy vehicles and modern designs that broke from the traditional architectural styles they felt comfortable with. The McLaren served as an emblem of rebellion against their cherished norms and traditions. Instead of simply enjoying his car, Jake felt as if he had inadvertently become a target for scorn. The final nail in the coffin came when multiple residents reported instances where they felt intimidated by Jake's car during those spirited drives down the narrow streets lined with homes resembling quaint European cottages. In their eyes, speed equated to danger. His mere presence on those roads sent ripples of anxiety through an unsuspecting community longing for peace and predictability. As Jake contemplated these reasons alongside his frustrations, rage bubbled just beneath the surface. He couldn't help but see through their facade. For every safety concern raised or complaint filed, there seemed to be undercurrents of jealousy and resentment toward anyone who dared stand out or enjoy life outside their prescribed boundaries. While pondering his growing list of grievances against these self-declared guardians of normalcy, indignation surged stronger than ever before. The more he recognized how these demands sought to diminish not just his car but his entire identity as a person living authentically in this world, the more adamantly he began plotting rebellion. To thwart any notion that he would comply without a fight stirred deep within him an urge to defend not only his right to own and enjoy what he desired but also challenge anyone attempting to dictate who he could be or how he should live. As thoughts began swirling around enabling sabotage with reckless abandon became less like mere defiance and more like an act born out of necessity, a means to reclaim what was inherently his amid encroaching control. With clarity finally emerging through anger-fueled chaos, decisions began taking shape in his mind like shadows solidifying under flickering lights. Should he allow these demands from the HOA to render him compliant? Or would he instead be driven into a show of force? Somewhere amidst those thoughts lay an answer waiting to be discovered, one that could either destroy him or bring forth newfound strength amid rising challenges. As Jake stared out at the McLaren, its sleek silhouette casting a long shadow on the driveway, a whirlwind of thoughts surged through his mind. The more he pondered the HOA's demands, the clearer it became that he needed to act, but not in a way that would turn him into just another compliant resident of Crestview Estates. He was tired of feeling powerless, tired of being boxed into a corner by rules he never agreed to. Planning the sabotage began as a mere flicker of an idea, one that quickly ignited into a full-blown scheme. His heart raced at the thought of disabling the brakes. It felt radical yet exhilarating, like pushing the accelerator pedal down to the floor and letting speed take over. But with each heartbeat came an avalanche of moral considerations. Was this really the path he wanted to take? Would he be crossing a line that could never be uncrossed? He paced back and forth in his garage, cluttered with tools and spare parts from various projects. The smell of oil and metal stirred something within him, a reminder of past endeavors where he had engineered joy from mechanical chaos. This is no different, he mused to himself. It's just reclaiming what's mine. But even as those words echoed in his mind, doubts gnawed at him. What if this sabotage led to unintended consequences? Jake winced at the thought. What if someone were hurt? This was more than an act of rebellion. It would be playing with fire. Yet, as anger bubbled just below his surface, he reasoned that perhaps this drastic measure was warranted. After all, wasn't his freedom worth fighting for? The HOA had already declared war on his happiness by trying to control how he lived. Jake stopped pacing and focused on the McLaren again. Each time he envisioned its vibrant orange hue shimmering under sunlight as he drove down winding roads filled with possibility, his resolve strengthened. He remembered how liberating it felt, how every rev of the engine seemed to shout against conformity. In his mind's eye, he could see himself behind the wheel once more, a man taking charge of his own destiny rather than cowering beneath heavy-handed governance. With newfound determination coursing through him, Jake mentally mapped out exactly how he would implement the plan. Disabling the brakes wouldn't require an elaborate setup. It was all about precision and timing. He knew enough about cars to identify key components without needing extensive knowledge or experience in automotive engineering. Just removing some essential parts or loosening critical connections might suffice, and could be done discreetly when no one was watching. Yet along with excitement came caution. Would neighbors notice something amiss? Could this single act spiral into greater chaos or lead him right down a path toward legal trouble? Each question twisted painfully in his gut. Despite all possible outcomes swirling like storm clouds overhead, Jake felt emboldened by one overriding thought. He couldn't let anyone dictate who he was or what brought him joy. In truth, this wasn't merely about sabotaging a car. It was about standing up against oppression masquerading as community governance. With every passing second contemplating this course of action solidified both urgency and purpose within him. A fierce commitment not just to protect his possessions but also assertively redefine himself beyond limits imposed by others. His mind raced with frantic calculations. If it worked smoothly without arousing suspicion or causing harm, would there be lasting repercussions for himself? Surely there would always be risks involved when fighting back. The stakes were high, but then again, what good ever came from living under tyranny? As night fell around Crestview Estates and darkness enveloped every corner of his thoughts, Jake made up his mind. He would take that leap into defiance and fight for what mattered most. Not just for himself but against complacency itself. A chance at liberation disguised amid defiance waiting at his fingertips. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting shadows across Jake's garage as he prepared to execute his drastic plan. A cocktail of adrenaline and dread coursed through him as he gathered the tools necessary for the sabotage. With each metallic clang of the wrench hitting the concrete floor, he felt a mixture of exhilaration and trepidation. This was truly happening. He had crossed the threshold from contemplation to action, and there was no turning back. Jake took a moment to breathe deeply, steadying his nerves in the dim light of his garage. The McLaren sat like a beast awaiting its rider, its sleek frame reflecting the uncertainty in Jake's heart. He approached, feeling both reverence and resentment for the machine that had brought him so much joy, yet also placed him at odds with his neighbors. As he kneeled beside the car, the scent of oil and rubber filled the air, grounding him in reality. The first step was to remove the rear wheel. He grabbed the jack and positioned it under the car with care, lifting the vehicle just high enough to access the brake assembly. His hands trembled slightly as he loosened the lug nuts, fear gnawing at him. What if someone saw him? What if this went wrong? Yet those thoughts were quickly drowned out by a deeper resolve. He was reclaiming his freedom. As he removed the wheel and exposed the brake caliper, Jake's heart raced at what lay ahead. Disabling the brakes wasn't just a mechanical task. It felt like a declaration of war against an enemy that threatened to control his life. He fished through his toolbox for pliers and screws, mentally navigating through each phase of his plan as if orchestrating a delicate ballet. He knew that it wouldn't take much to compromise the braking system. Merely loosening a few key bolts could render them ineffective. With each twist of his hand on those screws, however, thoughts of potential disaster flashed through his mind. What if someone drove it without knowing? What damage could be done? A pit formed in his stomach as he realized that this act could lead to unforeseen consequences beyond his control. Yet every time doubt crept in, anger flared up again. This was about more than just defiance. It was about taking back control. As he dismantled components with painstaking precision, Jake's mind raced with reflections of how far he had come and how much he stood to lose. The image of complying with HOA demands haunted him. Handing over those keys felt like surrendering a piece of his soul. Each bolt he loosened was not just a step toward sabotage but also a step away from conformity. After what felt like hours, he finally stood back and surveyed his work. Brake parts strewn about like remnants from a battlefield. Anxiety twisted in his gut as he realized what he had done. An impulse born from frustration had morphed into something tangible and dangerous. Jake weighed the risks heavily against what lay ahead. What if someone discovered this before it escalated? Would he be ostracized by not only neighbors but also by himself for crossing such a grave moral line? He thought about how easy it would be for someone else, a neighbor or even himself during an errant drive, to become embroiled in something tragic should a brake failure occur. Yet amidst these fears lurked an undeniable thrill. The exhilaration of reclaiming agency over his own life surged through him. He envisioned driving down those winding roads once again, free from judgment, free from control, a newfound sense of liberation igniting within him. As Jake finished up and reassembled everything into semblance, a shiver ran down his spine at what lay ahead. Each choice carries weight. Every decision leads somewhere unforeseen. But tonight, with darkness creeping into every corner of Crestview Estates, all that mattered was that Jake Thornton had made a bold move against complacency, and now awaited whatever consequences were bound to follow. The morning sunlight filtered through the trees lining Crestview Estates, illuminating Jake's driveway where his McLaren sat, now a vehicle of both pride and peril. The events of the previous night loomed heavily in his mind as he heard the distinctive sound of tires crunching on gravel. His heart raced. The HOA was here. They were coming to demand the keys to his prized possession, and he was acutely aware of the secret he had hidden beneath the surface. Jake stepped out onto the porch, feigning a casual demeanor while his stomach twisted into knots. He saw the familiar faces of the HOA board members approaching, Mr. Jenkins, the self-appointed leader with a penchant for order, and Mrs. Hawthorne, whose disapproving glare could silence an entire room. Their confident strides matched their purpose, and with every step they took toward him, Jake felt as if he were being cornered like prey. "Good morning, Jake," Mr. Jenkins began, his tone dripping with a faux congeniality that made Jake bristle. "We need to discuss your McLaren once again." Jake plastered on a smile, masking the turmoil inside him. "Of course, what can I do for you?" Without preamble, Mrs. Hawthorne pulled out a clipboard, her glasses perched on the tip of her nose as she scribbled notes. "As you know, we've received numerous complaints regarding your vehicle. Today we must insist that you hand over the keys for inspection. It's crucial for maintaining safety and harmony in our community." Their words washed over him like cold water. The demand felt like a direct assault on his autonomy, and memories of last night flooded his mind. The adrenaline of sabotage, the thrill of defiance. But now he stood exposed, caught between their judgment and his concealed rebellion. "What exactly do you plan to inspect?" Jake asked, trying to maintain his composure. The tension in the air crackled like electricity as he carefully weighed his response. Would they notice something amiss? Would they sense that he had sabotaged the very vehicle they sought to control? "Safety concerns," Mr. Jenkins replied sharply, glancing at his clipboard as if it contained all the moral authority needed to justify their intrusion. "And aesthetics too. Your car detracts from our neighborhood's character." "Right?" Jake said, swallowing hard. He could feel his pulse quickening, the weight of their scrutiny heavy upon him, but he steeled himself against his fears. He had removed vital components from those brakes yet stood as if nothing had changed. "Let's not drag this out," Mrs. Hawthorne added, her voice clipped. "Hand over the keys so we can ensure there are no further issues." In that moment, everything came to a head. Thoughts raced through Jake's mind. Should he refuse, fight back, or comply and risk revealing his secret? The stakes were higher than ever before. If they discovered what he had done, it would lead not only to consequences for him but also paint him as a reckless renegade in their eyes. A label he wasn't sure he could escape. Then it struck him. Compliance could be part of his strategy. By handing over the keys, he would maintain an appearance of obedience while keeping his sabotage hidden. Perhaps he could play their game long enough to turn this situation back in his favor. Taking a deep breath to calm his racing heart, Jake reached into his pocket and produced the keys to the McLaren. "Sure," he said finally, forcing nonchalance into his tone despite the tumultuous storm inside him. "I'll hand them over." As the keys clinked against Mrs. Hawthorne's clipboard, a wave of tension washed over him. A mixture of relief and dread settled in his gut. He had complied outwardly, but beneath that surface lay a fierce determination not to let anyone dictate who he was or what brought him joy. The HOA members exchanged satisfied glances, unaware of the battle raging within Jake. As they turned to leave, he felt an unexpected rush of power surging through him. He had played their game for now, but deep down he knew this was just another round in an ongoing war for freedom and control. And as their figures disappeared down the driveway, Jake steeled himself for whatever consequences lay ahead, ready to navigate his own path through whatever chaos awaited him next. The days following the HOA's demand for the keys to Jake's McLaren felt like a whirlwind of chaos and anxiety. He paced around his house, every creak of the floorboards echoing in his mind like a drum roll, heralding the uncertainty that lay ahead. Though he had played their game and complied outwardly, an unsettling guilt gnawed at him from the inside. The weight of his sabotage weighed heavily on his conscience, and he couldn't shake the thought that he had crossed a line. The HOA members had left with satisfied smirks, believing they held the reins. But deep down, Jake was grappling with his decision. A tug-of-war between a thrilling sense of defiance and a creeping dread about the consequences of his actions. The thought of someone unknowingly driving his McLaren, only to find the brakes malfunctioning, sent shivers down his spine. Every time he heard tires rolling down the street, a spike of panic gripped him. What if chaos erupted because of his reckless act? The vision of a disastrous accident haunted him, a ghostly specter that whispered reminders of the moral implications he had chosen to overlook. Yet, alongside that guilt brewed another feeling, the intoxicating high of having taken control. For so long, Jake felt trapped under the HOA's thumb, stifled by their rules and expectations. Now, as he stood gazing out at the driveway where his McLaren sat, still and silent, he experienced a flicker of satisfaction. He had acted against an authority that sought to dictate not just what he drove but how he lived. The thrill of rebellion fueled his resolve to maintain his independence in this trimmed-up community that so prized conformity. But freedom came with a cost. Jake's relationships with his neighbors began to shift. The polite exchanges over fences turned icy. The HOA's demands had set the stage for mounting tension within Crestview Estates. Whispers and glances followed him during jogs or visits to local shops. A palpable change in their demeanor made it clear they were watching him closely now. He was no longer just another resident. He had become an emblem of rebellion, and everyone seemed to have an opinion about him. During one particularly uncomfortable encounter at the grocery store, Mrs. Hawthorne confronted him. Her expression was disapproving, and she leaned in conspiratorially as she mentioned that there were worries about safety in the neighborhood after seeing his car parked under suspicious circumstances late at night. The other shoppers glanced over, their interest piqued as if they were all part of an unspoken tribunal judging Jake's character. "Just ensure you comply with the HOA moving forward," she warned, her tone dangerously close to a threat disguised as concern. "We don't want any accidents to tarnish this community's reputation." Jake forced a smile, both irritated and amused by her hypocrisy. It was ironic that she was concerned about reputation when they themselves had alarmed him into silent rebellion. While he nodded in agreement, inside he resolved not to let their judgment weigh him down. If anything, this scrutiny only galvanized his desire to be true to himself. With each passing day, he felt like a tightrope walker balancing between two realities: the oppressive expectations of the HOA on one side and his own fierce desire for freedom on the other. He realized he had inadvertently sparked a change within himself, not just against external pressures but also internally, where his understanding of self-worth blossomed. As he navigated this newfound tension in Crestview Estates, Jake became more deliberate in his actions. He explored avenues to widen paths of resistance while still keeping an eye on any consequences that might arise from his past decision. He began to gather fellow residents who shared similar frustrations, a quiet coalition rallying around the idea that their homes should represent not just aesthetics but personal freedoms as well. The road ahead was fraught with uncertainty and risk, yet Jake felt emboldened. He may have sabotaged the brakes on a car, but what he had really done was set himself on a course toward reclaiming not just his individual identity but potentially igniting change within an entire community where voice and choice mattered once again. The days turned into a blur as Jake settled into the new rhythm of living in the tension he had created. He felt emboldened by his act of sabotage, but the nagging fear of potential consequences never fully left him. The McLaren sat parked in his driveway, its sleek lines now a source of anxiety rather than pride. Then, one fateful afternoon, everything changed. It began innocently enough. Jake was at home when he heard the distant roar of an engine, a neighbor taking their car for a spin. Curiosity piqued. He stepped out onto the porch to watch. He could see Mr. Thompson, a longtime resident known for his strict adherence to HOA guidelines, pulling out of his driveway in what appeared to be his son's sports car. The young man had recently returned home from college and was eager to show off his newfound skills behind the wheel. At first, Jake felt a pang of jealousy. He wished it were him behind the wheel of something flashy, doing laps around the neighborhood without a care in the world. But that envy quickly transformed into dread as he remembered his own car's compromised brakes and what might happen if they failed at high speed. As Mr. Thompson made his way down the street, Jake's heart raced with each passing second. Suddenly, there was a screeching sound that filled the air. Tires losing traction as Mr. Thompson tried to navigate a turn too fast for comfort. The terror-stricken look on his face was palpable even from where Jake stood frozen on his porch. Time seemed to slow as Jake realized the gravity of what was happening. Mr. Thompson's car careened toward a group of children playing ball in front yards just ahead. A scene that morphed into pure chaos in an instant. The young driver frantically twisted the steering wheel, but instead of regaining control, he rammed straight into a nearby mailbox before veering off course and crashing through a decorative fence. The sound of metal crunching and wood splintering echoed throughout Crestview Estates like an explosion, sending neighbors rushing outside to witness what had just transpired. Panic erupted as shocked parents scooped up their children, while others gathered around the wreckage, murmuring anxiously about whether anyone had been hurt. Jake felt paralyzed by guilt as he watched people rush towards Mr. Thompson's crumpled vehicle. This wasn't how he had imagined rebellion would unfold. The once serene street now hummed with chaos and fear, and Jake's heart dropped as he contemplated how closely tied this incident was to his own reckless act against authority. His phone buzzed in his pocket. An alert from the neighborhood group chat discussing the accident and already hinting at suspicions regarding brake malfunctions being involved. Panic set in again. Would they connect this back to him? Would someone discover what he had done? The realization that his actions might have indirectly caused this incident struck him like a thunderclap. As emergency vehicles arrived and lights flashed against the backdrop of shocked faces, Jake slipped away from the crowd unnoticed and retreated back inside his house. His mind spun with fear. What if this led back to him? He thought about how quickly lives could change due to spontaneous decisions made in anger or defiance. Overwhelmed with feelings of guilt mixed with self-preservation instincts, Jake sat in silence as whispers echoed louder outside. Neighbors speculating about causes and accountability. The atmosphere shifted from mere curiosity to accusations. Fingers pointed at reckless driving behavior, while murmurs about safety regulations swirled around him like storm clouds gathering overhead. In those moments of reflection alone within four walls that suddenly felt claustrophobic, Jake came face to face with reality. He hadn't just sabotaged brakes. He had set off an unexpected chain reaction that threatened not only Mr. Thompson's safety but also impacted everyone within Crestview Estates. His home that now felt more like a battleground than ever before. As night fell over Crestview Estates and shadows crept across rooftops shrouded in uncertainty, Jake realized there would be no easy way out of this spiraling mess created by an impulsive rebellion against authority. A reminder that sometimes defiance comes at a price far beyond personal freedom alone. As night descended upon Crestview Estates, Jake sat on the edge of his bed, staring blankly at the wall. The events of the past week replayed in his mind like a broken record, each loop amplifying the weight of his decisions. The once vibrant thrill of rebellion had dulled into a heavy ache that settled deep in his chest, a constant reminder of what he had done and its far-reaching consequences. His thoughts drifted back to the accident. How quickly everything had unraveled. Mr. Thompson's son was now recovering in the hospital with minor injuries, but the emotional scars ran deeper than any physical wound. Jake remembered the panic that had surged through him as he watched the chaos unfold from his porch, gripping the railing until his knuckles turned white. It felt surreal to think that his act of defiance could have endangered lives and destabilized a sense of safety in the community he called home. Jake's relationship with his neighbors had become strained, tension palpable in every interaction. Where once there had been casual greetings and friendly banter over fences, now there were whispers behind closed doors and sidelong glances at the grocery store. He was no longer just another resident. He was an outsider, a symbol of rebellion that had gone too far. In some ways, it felt like he had placed a target on his own back. He wrestled with whether his actions had made a positive difference or merely exacerbated existing tensions within Crestview Estates. Had sabotaging his car truly been an act of empowerment? Or had it simply fueled more division among people who were already wary of change? The ideals he once held clear, freedom and autonomy, now seemed muddied by guilt and remorse. In conversations with others who shared his frustrations about the HOA's oppressive rules, he sensed a growing consensus for change but also an underlying fear. A fear that standing up would only lead to backlash rather than progress. This realization hit Jake hard. Perhaps rebellion needed to be more than reckless acts. It required unity and purposeful action rooted in dialogue rather than defiance alone. The following day brought a neighborhood meeting called by the HOA to address recent incidents and rising concerns about safety protocols. As Jake stood among familiar faces, he felt as if he were stepping onto a battlefield where opposing factions lay waiting for a fight. He could see Mrs. Hawthorne up front, her sharp gaze scanning the crowd for any sign of dissent while Mr. Jenkins prepared to deliver another lecture on community conduct. When it came time for residents to voice their opinions, Jake took a deep breath and stepped forward. His heart raced as all eyes turned toward him. He could feel their judgment weighing heavily on him like an anchor pulling him down. "I want to address what happened with Mr. Thompson's son," Jake began, his voice wavering slightly but gaining strength as he continued. "I've struggled with my choices lately. What I thought was an act of independence spiraled into something dangerous that affected us all." The murmurs around him shifted from hostility to curiosity as he spoke candidly about his feelings of guilt and how rebellion without thought can lead to unintended consequences. He urged everyone present to consider working together rather than apart, emphasizing that real change required understanding and collaboration instead of isolation and division. As he finished speaking, a heavy silence hung in the air before someone from the crowd finally spoke up. A neighbor who expressed gratitude for Jake's honesty and echoed sentiments about wanting safer ways to address grievances against the HOA without resorting to sabotage or conflict. That moment sparked something within the gathering. Others began sharing their own experiences and frustrations with the association and how they might navigate these challenges together moving forward. It became clear that while tensions existed within Crestview Estates, they also provided fertile ground for dialogue, a community searching for common ground amid conflicting ideals. As Jake left that meeting with new determination coursing through him, he realized that perhaps he could still make amends, not through reckless acts but by fostering community spirit rooted in collaboration and understanding. His journey toward freedom need not be solitary. It could be shared by those willing to stand beside him, an alliance forged not from anger but compassion. The road ahead remained uncertain, yet Jake felt hopeful for what lay ahead. A chance to redefine not just himself but also reshape Crestview Estates into a place where voices mattered beyond mere conformity, where true freedom resided not only in individual pursuits but in collective unity as well. In the aftermath of his tumultuous experience in Crestview Estates, Jake found himself reflecting deeply on the lessons learned from his rebellion against authority and the consequences that followed. He realized that defiance, while sometimes necessary, carries risks that extend far beyond the individual. The thrill of rebellion had given way to a clearer understanding of what it truly meant to stand up for one's beliefs without causing harm to others. Through his impulsive act of sabotaging the brakes of his McLaren, Jake had thought he was reclaiming control over his life, a symbol of independence from the oppressive HOA regulations. Instead, he ignited a chain reaction that jeopardized not only his freedom but also the safety and well-being of his neighbors. A harsh truth settled in: personal integrity is not solely about asserting one's rights. It also involves recognizing and respecting the impact one's actions can have on the community at large. As he navigated the fallout from Mr. Thompson's accident, Jake came to understand that effective change requires more than just anger-driven acts. It necessitates dialogue, cooperation, and a shared vision for improvement. During the neighborhood meeting where he bravely addressed both his guilt and desire for change, he had seen firsthand how vulnerability could foster connection. In opening up about his struggles, he sparked a conversation among residents that emphasized collective responsibility rather than isolated defiance. Jake learned that authority figures, like the HOA, often exist to maintain order and safety within a community, but their rules should not stifle individuality or self-expression. In grappling with this balance, he recognized that pushing back against authority could be done constructively through engagement rather than reckless sabotage. This revelation reshaped how he viewed both himself and those around him. Everyone wanted to feel heard and valued. Moreover, Jake understood that true freedom does not come at the expense of others. He reflected on how his actions had alienated him from neighbors who once welcomed him with open arms. The sense of community was fragile and needed nurturing, something he had overlooked while chasing personal liberation. For meaningful progress to occur within Crestview Estates, it would require collaboration rather than competition or conflict. With these revelations in mind, Jake felt compelled to put forth an initiative aimed at bridging divides between residents and fostering unity amid diversity. He envisioned organizing regular meetings where everyone could voice concerns, grievances against HOA policies included, but also celebrate their individual triumphs as part of a broader community narrative. By channeling pent-up frustrations into constructive discussions, they could collectively work toward solutions instead of allowing anger to fracture their bonds further. As he began laying out plans for this grassroots movement of engagement and understanding among residents, Jake felt infused with hope rather than trepidation. Each resident brought unique perspectives shaped by their own experiences with authority, whether it be through navigating rules laid down by the HOA or dealing with life's unpredictabilities elsewhere, and together they formed an intricate tapestry woven from shared aspirations for growth. The road ahead remained uncertain. There would likely be challenges along the way as old tensions resurfaced or disagreements arose over differing priorities. However, Jake now approached these challenges with renewed vigor, not out of rebellion but out of commitment to integrity. He was no longer simply fighting against something. He was working toward building something better. In concluding this chapter in Crestview Estates filled with lessons learned amid upheaval and introspection, readers are left pondering their own values around authority and rebellion. How can one assert individuality without infringing upon communal harmony? What does it mean to take a stand for personal freedom while simultaneously nurturing relationships? Ultimately, true strength lies not just in defiance but in collaboration, an acknowledgement that everyone's voice contributes to shaping a vibrant community where all can thrive together.